Hello, welcome back to Levant TV's Press Review. I'm Khalil Khouairi. Today we'll be taking a look at Hezbollah's losing its top weapons expert and the impact jihadists are having on the war in Syria. But as usual, let's take a look at the papers here in the UK. Nigella Lawson reigns on several front pages today as they focus on her admission to taking drugs including cocaine and cannabis, with most leading their papers on the suggestion that Chancellor George Osborne's autumn statement will set out changes to the state pension that could see today's 20-somethings working until their 70th birthday. And also The Guardian notes that those who aren't fit enough to work in their late 60s will be marooned on increasingly tight benefits. Leading their front page with the same story, the Independent's editorial says retirements at 70 is hardly working into one's dotage. As people enjoy increased life expectancy, it adds we should not be bemoaning George Osborne's reforms, we should be throwing a party. Taking a look at Nigella Lawson's, the paper refers to the celebrity chef as biting back after she alleges her husband's bid to destroy her. The Daily Telegraph takes an in-depth look at Lawson's appearance at court, describing her with the regal name, the perfect complexion, with just enough liner on those flashing eyes and just enough pallor to hint at sufferings nobly borne. Of Miss Lawson's evidence about drug taking, the writer adds, it was all besides the point, anything would have been after an entrance like that. The paper is not so happy with the new pension news as it headlines a story, millions of under 50s forced to work longer for a pension. And finally, from the UK, The Times says the pension burden is a looming time bomb, adding that next year's school leavers will need to work 52 years of their life before they qualify for state pension. And of course, like all other front pages, features Miss Lawson, who gave evidence at Isleworth Crown Court for almost 7 hours yesterday in the fraud trial of two Italian sisters who worked for her as domestic assistants. And now let's take a look at the top stories in the Middle East. Hezbollah has announced the death of one of their key commanders, Hassan al-Aqis, who was assassinated outside his home in a town near Beirut on Tuesday. Let's take a look at what analysts say of the commander and who could be responsible for his death. Writing for Israel's Haaretz, Amos Harel says Hezbollah assassination marks biggest blow to group since Mughniye killing. Harel says the death of Hassan al-Aqis, a senior Hezbollah commander who was killed on Tuesday in what looks like a clean and especially professional assassination in Dahye, the Shiite quarter of Beirut, is the biggest operational blow to the Lebanese organization since the death of Imad Mughniye. Harel highlights that in the past, intelligence officials have described Laqis as a brilliant mind who played a combined role in the Shiite organization, which could be compared to the head of Israel Defense Forces Research and Development, as well as Technology and Logistics branch. Harel believes that Laqis' death strips Hezbollah of an intelligence source, a person whose experience and widespread connections to Syrian and Iranian intelligence organization served Hezbollah well for almost 3 decades. Taking a look at Israel's involvement, Harel notes that aside from a general and almost automatic denial by the foreign ministry spokesman, Israel has not reacted to claims from Lebanon. He believes that it's part of a regular policy whose main purpose is to maintain a sphere of denial, which Israel has been using in recent years regarding all the activities attributed to it in Syria and Lebanon. Harel notes that several hours following the reports of Laqis' death, an extremist Sunni organization released a statement in which it assumed responsibility for the assassination. Since anyone with a basic knowledge of Arabic and familiarity with the relevant internet forums can present himself today as an extremist Sunni organization, it is hard to judge the reliability of the report. Harel concludes that as far as Hezbollah is concerned, there is no question that if the organization believes that Israel is responsible, it will retaliate. We can assume that the basic interest of the organization to avoid an overall conflict with the IDF remains unchanged. And writing for Al-Monitor, Ali Hashim takes an interesting look at who Hassan al-Aqis was in his article, Assassinated Hezbollah Leader Key to Technology Drone Operations. Hashim says it was at least the 4th time coming face-to-face with his assassins. Hassan al-Aqis didn't survive this time. So was this Hezbollah high-tech unit head who was killed. He interviews a source close to Hezbollah who says al-Lakis was one of Imad Mughniye's smart students. He was Hezbollah's technological Mughniye. He's the commander whose team gave Israel and its spies a serious headache, both on the ground and in the air. He was a genius on the head of tens of geniuses who are expected to continue the job he was doing. Hashim says that the source explained that Lakis was fond of technology and took his first step 2 decades ago on the way to transferring Hezbollah into techie organization. His steps were seen by many in the beginning as very ambitious. He was the man who made Hezbollah intercept Israelis' UAVs and record their footage for years. According to Al-Monitor's source, Lakis and his team should be credited for the Ayub drone that on October 7, 2012 penetrated the Israeli airspace, passing close to the most important strategic Israeli installation, the Dimona nuclear reactor. The drone bypassed the entire Israeli radar and air defense system before being detected and downed by Israel. Hashim points out that in 2006, during the July-August war between Israel and Hezbollah, Lakis survived 2 attempts on his life, one in which 26 people, along with his eldest son Ali Rida, were killed when an Israeli fighter jet struck the building where he lives. The source tells Hashim his phone was with the son just a few minutes after his son put the phone on, for a certain reason, an Israeli plane bombarded the building where he was. Hashim concludes that the source revealed that there are serious doubts with Hezbollah's security ranks whether the assassination was fully planned and executed by Israeli officers or by operatives in Lebanon, except for the surveillance. The Globe and Mail takes a look at the killing, asking who killed Hassan al-Lakis, Hezbollah's commander in Lebanon, taking a look at 4 different possibilities. First, the paper says Hezbollah has no shortage of rivals eager to strike at its strongholds and leadership, and begins first with taking a look at Israel. It notes enmity runs between Israel and Hezbollah. The Lebanese group waged an insurgency against the nearly 20-year Israeli military occupation of southern Lebanon. Before Israel withdrew in 2000, the Israelis have killed or have been suspected of killing high-ranking Hezbollah figures for decades. And the second possibility, the paper looks at Saudi Arabia, citing that al-Lakis killing came shortly after Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah, speaking to a TV station, accused Saudi Arabia of being behind the November 19th suicide bombings at the Iranian embassy in Beirut. He indirectly blamed an alliance between Iran's rivals Israel and Saudi Arabia for trying to strike at Hezbollah, which is Tehran's proxy in Lebanon. The allegations illustrated the Syrian civil war's sectarian overtones and regional impact. The analysis adds that Saudi Arabia fears what it sees as Iran trying to spread its influence across the Arab world. Under this thinking, a Saudi strike against Hezbollah would be a blow to Iran and its regional ambitions. The third group the paper believes could be responsible is Al-Qaeda. The paper says Sunni extremists linked to Al-Qaeda are staunch opponents of Hezbollah. One such Lebanese group, the Abdullah Azzam Brigades, claimed responsibility for the Iranian embassy attack and said more would follow unless Hezbollah withdrew its fighters from Syria. And the final possibility the paper lists is Syrian rebels, noting that Syrian rebels have been threatening Hezbollah since the group sent fighters to Syria. 2 previously unknown Sunni groups claimed responsibility for al-Lakis assassination, although the claims could not be verified. Since Hezbollah's intervention in Syria began, its strongholds have been targeted by rockets and car bombings in apparent retaliation. As the Syria crisis continues, let's take a look at what analysts are saying on the impact of jihadists, which is having an impact on the war. Amberin Zaman writes in Al-Monitor an article headlined Al-Qaeda in Syria targets Turkmen minority, in which she discusses how Turkmen have been affected by Al-Qaeda-linked fighters and how they believe that they have been abandoned by Turkey. According to Zaman, Al-Qaeda-linked fighters singled out a new and vulnerable target, the country's small Turkmen minority. The writer says over the past 2 months, the group known as the Islamic State of Iran and Al-Sham, ISIS, has been menacing a cluster of Turkmen villages wedged between the Turkish province of Hatay and the Mediterranean Sea. Zaman refers to Omar Abdullah, a member of the Omar al-Mukhtar brigade, who said, "We used to live in peace in our orchards, now we are being attacked from all sides, including the ISIS." Abdullah added, when the ISIS militants first rolled in their flashy weapons and SUVs, they were on their best behavior. But soon they began replacing local school teachers and imams and preaching their rigid, unsmiling brand of Islam. Zaman refers to Aytun Orhan, a Middle East analyst with the Ankara-based Orsam think tank, who believes that the Turkmen may soon become targets to Syria's Kurds. Zaman states that for the Kurds who are locked in a bloody turf war with the ISIS, control over the Turkmen villages in Latakia province would ease their ambitions to create an uninterrupted zone of Kurdish influence along the Turkish border. This in turn would give them access to the Mediterranean Sea. According to Zaman, there are around 200,000 Turkmen in Syria. However, unlike the Kurds who remain neutral in the Syria uprising, the Turkmen got dragged in. Bayer became one of the main transit points for tens of thousands of Syrians seeking refuge in Turkey. Zaman goes on to say that the bitter divisions that have paralyzed the Free Syrian Army are mirrored among the various Turkmen brigades. Relations among their political leaders, most of whom are based in Istanbul, are similarly fraught. Zaman adds, although the Turkmen are set to hold 4 of the 60 seats in the Istanbul-based umbrella group known as the National Coalition for Syria Revolutionary and Opposition Forces, they feel they are underrepresented. Zaman cites Yusuf Baldir, a Turkmen fighter with the Al-Zahar Bribers Brigade, as saying that now the Free Syrian Army is denying them their shares of weapons sent from the opposition sponsors in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Libya. They are being hogged by factions close to the Muslim Brotherhood, let alone guns and bullets. We are running out of food. We need Turkey's help. Serif Çirkin, a lawmaker for Turkey's far-right Nationalist Action Party, agrees that Turkey must arm the Turkmen immediately. He predicts that unless they are given the means to defend themselves, the Turkmen will be driven out of Syria altogether. And to conclude, Zaman notes that matters have not been helped by the participation Turkmen brigades in joint Free Syrian Army and jihadist assault against the Kurds in the towns of Ras Al Ain in July. According to Amir Suhto, a fighter in the Turkmen Yavuz Sultan Selim brigade, Turkey gave us lots of ammunition. Then many of us, the Turkish fighters, were women and they had amazing weapons. And Dr. Muhammad Abdu Al-Ibrahim writes an article for the Sia Times headlined, "The Saudi Wahhabi Cannibals," in which she looks at the impact of jihadists on Syria. According to Al-Ibrahim, the Saudi Wahhabi cannibals have been ordered by their Bandar-like terrorism masters and supporters to perpetrate the more of their atrocities in the Syrian coastal towns of Latakia and the countryside. Al-Ibrahim cites Newsweek and not to a Syria media outlet as saying those terrorists attacked before the sun rose towards the end of Ramadan. In the August heat, the terrorists went from house to house in the small Alawite villages near Al-Akrad mountains, delivering death and terror. The inhabitants of this Western Syria governorate were farmers, simple people. Until that morning, they have been able to avoid the brutal fighting that has ravaged Syria. According to Newsweek, the massacre that commenced that day was shocking in its brutality, but newsworthy for another reason. It has committed by jihadist group fighting on the terrorist side. These terrorists burned whatever possessions they found, including homes. They gunned down the elderly and the disabled. Al-Ibrahim refers to Human Rights Watch as saying that 67 people from these villages were unlawfully killed and that some corpses were bound, showing signs of execution. Others were decapitated. Al-Ibrahim states that after the slaughter, the Saudi-groomed terrorists took hostages, mostly women and children. He says that according to sources in Damascus, the fighters, led by local jihadist group as well as members of Jabhat al-Nusra and the Al-Qaeda-linked group Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, are still holding more than 100 civilian non-combatants. To conclude, Al-Ibrahim claims that the Wahhabis have failed to sow sedition among the members of the one Syrian family. However, they have shed the more of civilian blood and caused our bitter tears. We are the majority and our cause is just and right, and the brutality and savagery of the Wahhabi and Al-Qaeda affiliates in scores of places in Syria would definitely but reinforce and strengthen our determination to eliminate the last terrorists from the sacred land of Syria. The New York Times features an article headlined, "Syria crisis is worsening, UN relief official says." Here, Rick Gladstone analyzes why the Syrian conflict might not be coming to an end anytime soon. Gladstone refers to be the top emergency relief official at the United Nations, who expressed new alarm on Tuesday at the humanitarian crisis caused by Syria's civil war, telling Security Council that despite some modest progress, both the government and insurgent sides were still impeding urgent deliveries of food and medicine to millions of desperate civilians. Speaking to reporters after a close briefing for Security Council diplomats, the official Valerie Amos, the Under-Secretary General and Emergency Relief Coordinator, said that the Syrian authorities had been permitting aid convoys from Lebanon, Jordan and Iraq, but had refused to allow any from Turkey, which the Syrian government has accused of abetting the insurgency. Amos added that in the 2 months since the Security Council unanimously approved a presidential statement urging all sides to allow emergency humanitarian access, some advances had been made. But on the protection of civilians, demilitarization of schools and hospitals, and access to hardest-to-reach areas, Ms. Amos said, we have not seen any progress on those. Gladstone cites the Syrian ambassador to the United Nations, Bashar Jafari, who asserted that the Syrian government's cooperation with international relief groups has eased some of the suffering. Mr. Jafari also had harsh words for Saudi Arabia, long accused by his government of financing, recruiting and arming Sunni jihadist militants linked to Al-Qaeda that are waging the war on Syria. Finally, Gladstone indicates another reason for why the Syria crisis is worsening. She points out that in Lebanon, Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, accused Saudi Arabia directly for the first time on Tuesday of involvement in the deadly double bombing at the Iranian embassy in Beirut last month. Gladstone quotes Mr. Nasrallah as saying on the Lebanese television channel OTV, Saudi intelligence had collaborated with Al-Qaeda-linked militants to carry out the attack, which was a direct challenge to Iran, Saudi Arabia's regional rival for power. Gladstone concludes saying, however, Mr. Nasrallah also pushed with new vigor for a political solution in Syria. He praised the signs of reconciliation between Iran and the United States as having averted regional war. And now let's take a look at the top headlines from international papers. Starting with the UAE's Gulf News, which leads its front page with the headline, Khalifa and Mohammed get Iran invitations as countries seek to enhance ties. And Russia's Moscow Times leads with the headline, Lavrov slams NATO's Ukraine stance. The international New York Times leads its front page with the headline, protesters in Ukraine get sanctuary and support as the Orthodox Church backs European Union pact and the government's ouster. And finally, Israel's Haaretz leads its front page with the headline, Israel denies Hezbollah's accusation it killed one of its commanders. That was it for today. My colleague Carmen will be with you tomorrow, and I'll see you Monday with another analytical press review.